Hey folks, I hope you already read about the ways you can follow along with this video because I am just gonna hop right into it. Here we go. Butterflies, gonna talk about them. So, butterflies, moths, and skippers, three closely related animals. They're all flying insects. You've probably heard of butterflies and moths, maybe not of skippers, but we'll talk about it. They are in the same phylum, which is they're all a certain type of animal called an arthropod. They're all in the same class. They're all a certain type of insect. And even more than that, they're closely related insects that are in the same order called Lepidoptera. We'll get to that word in a minute. That's kind of the title of this presentation. If these words don't mean anything to you, phylum, class, and order, you might kind of send your mind back to biology when we talked about kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. If that still doesn't ring any bells, don't worry. We'll be talking about it here soon this year. I'm just trying to say they're all closely related. Some basics about insects. Later this year, we're going to have a whole unit where we talk about insects, but because we haven't gotten there yet, let's just talk about some of the things that make something an insect. They all share certain features, which include 6 legs, 1 pair of antennae, so 2 total antennae, and then they have 3 distinct body regions. Those 3 regions are called the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. I'm going to circle them here in a color-coded way, so obviously that's the head. This part in the middle is the thorax, and then this big part at the end of the butterfly body would be called the abdomen. If you picture a bee or an ant, it's broken down into 3 different parts as well. Each of those are the same, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. All insects share those features. Some cool things about butterflies specifically, they do have compound eyes, the same type of eyes that you might have seen on a bee or a fly, if you've ever seen a close-up image. So instead of just one eyeball, they've got like a million tiny little cells that make up their eye. It's hard for us to know just how well other species see, but we believe actually their vision might be better than ours. On top of that, they also may be able to see some colors that we can't see. So ultraviolet just means beyond the spectrum that we can see. So they might actually, when they're navigating the world, they might even see a more colorful world than we do. They also have this cool thing here, and both of these images are showing it. This is the curled up version of it here. And in this one, you can see it extending out. That's really their mouth. It's called a proboscis. Now that we're studying butterflies, I hope you kind of go out in the world a bit and look for them. And I will say, ever since I learned this fact just last year, when I go out and I'm looking at butterflies and I see them land on flowers, you can watch this thing unfurl. It's almost like a giant straw that they use to drink the nectar in the flowers. Another thing that most of you have heard about in butterflies is this idea of metamorphosis. So some insects, including the ones we're talking about here, go through actually what's called complete metamorphosis. Complete metamorphosis just means that the adult form looks completely different from the younger form. They emerge, you guys probably have heard this, the story of a caterpillar becoming the butterfly, and they emerge from their cocoon or their chrysalis, just totally different, fully grown, meaning that when you see small butterflies out there in the world, they're not going to grow any different size. So like small butterflies aren't just baby butterflies that are about to grow bigger. When they come out of the cocoon, that's it. Whatever size they are, they're going to be that size for their whole life. Usually once they emerge, they are going to live for, on average, about 2 weeks. So most butterflies die after about 2 weeks. Some of them live for months, though. These are the 4 main stages of the butterfly lifestyle. They lay an egg, it becomes the caterpillar, which we call the larva. It makes a cocoon or a chrysalis, which we'll talk about the difference of those in a moment, called the pupa. And then it emerges from the pupa as a fully formed adult. Here's an image of the black swallowtail. So there is the larva and there is the adult. And somewhere in here we've had a complete change. These two hardly even resemble each other. Now, a little bit about this pupa stage, because it's different when we talk about different type of Lepidoptera. When we are talking about moths, they have one that's kind of coated in a silk. It almost looks like it's hairy there. And that's what we actually call a cocoon. Cocoon is actually technically not the right word when we talk about butterflies. Theirs is called a chrysalis, and that's actually made of protein. This is a really great time lapse showing a monarch caterpillar as it's beginning to form its chrysalis. And you can see actually what it's doing there is it's just molting its skin, and what's left underneath is the chrysalis. You can see the skin kind of, it actually pops off and falls off there at the end. I have those caterpillars that are our class pets, and after this process happens, it looks like a dead spider at the bottom of the container. It's just their shriveled up skin that's fallen off. Some more details about their bodies is if you zoom all the way in, these are actually close-ups of different butterfly wings. So the word Lepidoptera is a Greek word meaning scaled wings. That's why butterflies, moths, and skippers are in the order after that name. Their wings and bodies are typically covered in these scales that I like to think they look almost like shingles on a roof. And the different colors come together to make the beautiful patterns that we see on their wings. So if you were to zoom in closer and closer, it almost looks like a pixelated image because each one of those different scales, sometimes they're different colors to create this kind of beautiful mosaic that you see as a pattern on the wing. Those scales is another reason that butterflies are really delicate. If you see a butterfly, you're not really supposed to pick it up or catch it, especially not by the wings, because if you were to do that, you might rip a lot of those delicate scales off, and they don't regrow those easily. They may never regrow those, and you might make their short life even shorter. Okay, a couple of distinctions here because we're going to talk about skippers. If you look at this top image, a year ago, before I really learned about these things, I probably would have said, oh, that's a moth. Actually, that's what we call a skipper. So butterflies and skippers are very closely related, and they share more in common with each other than they do with moths. So some of the things that they share, butterflies and skippers, is that they both tend to be around during the daytime. That's why we're going to study these two, because they're really easy to see. Also, their front and back wings are not joined together. This image here, it's a type of swallowtail. It's actually a little clearer in this image. This front wing and this back wing, they can move separately. Sometimes if you get up really close to a butterfly and you look at the wings, you'll see they'll sometimes even kind of bristle them or move them separately. So in this top image, in the skipper, the bottom wing there with that white on it can move independently of that top wing here with the orange on it. In a moth, they have a wing that looks similar, but it's all just one big piece instead of two separate pieces. The big giveaway is the antennas. So if we look at butterfly and skipper antenna, you can see that even though their faces and bodies look different, the antenna look pretty similar. The skippers looks kind of just like the butterflies with a little hook at the end, whereas even though the face and the body of the skipper looks kind of like the moth, look at that antenna. They have what's called a fanned antenna where all these little things are fanning out. So if you ever see a bug and you're not sure, is that a skipper or is it a moth? You might be able to look closely and see what type of antenna it has, and that should be a giveaway of whether it's a moth or a skipper. Skippers, we group them, technically we just say they're a type of butterfly, but they're often confused with moths because they each have kind of this fat, furry body. If you look at these two, one of these is a skipper and one of these is a moth. Can you tell the difference? The difference is the skipper is on top. If you look here, you can tell the giveaway by the antenna. So there's that short little hook we talked about versus look right here, you can see the big fanned out antenna of the moth. Okay, so a little bit of what's the importance, like why are butterfly worth studying? Do they really do anything other than look pretty? And the answer is yeah. They play a pretty key role in the food web of their ecosystem. There's many other animals that rely on eating caterpillars for survival. So one of their main food sources is caterpillars of certain species. Also, another key idea is that many insects, including those in Lepidoptera, they are pollinators of native plants. So first, a little bit about native plants. Native plants are just ones that naturally occur in an area over a long period of time. So native plants of Ohio, those have been here for thousands of years or more. And typically, native plants are the ones that local animal species depend on. So not only do the butterflies help the native plants, but they can't survive without them. They have what are called host plants, where they only lay their egg on one type of plant, and those are usually native plants that have been around a long time. But butterflies also then help those plants out by being pollinators. You may know a little bit about this from hearing about bees, but other insects do it too. They spread pollen from one plant to another when they're searching for nectar, and that pollen is part of the reproductive process. And many plants can't reproduce without their pollen being spread from one plant to another. And so this is kind of like a positive feedback cycle where the plants help the butterflies and other insects, and those insects go on to help the plants in that they help pollinate them and keep those plants alive as well. Another key piece of importance for something like butterflies is that they are a closely monitored species. And monitored here just means they're watched. They're watched because they're beautiful. People like to see them. They're easy to see. They're fun to kind of keep track of which ones you're keeping an eye on. But this also gives us lots of clues about all those insects that maybe we aren't studying as closely. You know, there's only so many scientists in the world and only so much money that can go into research. So there's a lot of insects out there in the world that we're not closely watching to say what's happening with them. So instead, the ones that are important to us, or maybe the ones that are beautiful and the ones that people like to watch, we watch for trends in what's happening with those insects, and that tells us about what's happening with all the insects. Sadly, one of the things that we're learning from this is that there's kind of, from everything we can tell, a global insect apocalypse going on. Lots of the species that we are monitoring are declining in huge amounts, closely by half or so 45% population drop. If we want to talk about why is that happening, here in Ohio, just in the last few hundred years, 500 years since Europeans have come to North America, we've lost 90% of the wetlands that were once here. And those wetlands were home to many of our native plant species. And many of the animals that depend on those native plant species have since had to move elsewhere or gone extinct. Other species are really sensitive to the changing temperatures of climate change. So even though right now we're only beginning to feel the effects of global temperature increase, as that changes, that's going to push species to migrate to other areas that better suit their temperature range, and some of them won't be able to migrate fast enough, and they will be going extinct. Others are also damaged by pesticides. We use pesticides as humans for lots of reasons. In Ohio, we produce a lot of food. We put pesticide on the food to prevent certain pests from eating it, but that also harms many of the other insects in the area. Lots of cities also spray for mosquitoes during the summer, and those same chemicals can go on and have an effect on things other than just the mosquitoes. If this bothers you as much as it bothers me, I put together a couple ways that you can actually help with these problems. The first one are a couple of apps you can download. They are called iNaturalist and Seek. iNaturalist is one that, as you learn to identify species, when you go on a walk outside, you just enter in the species that you saw on that day, and it keeps track of where you saw them. And it helps scientists study patterns of species all across the country, and it helps them to decide which questions and research ideas are worth investigating. Seek is kind of a partner but separate app to iNaturalist, and it actually really helps identify things. It's amazing for plants because they don't move. But if you can get close enough to an animal without it moving, what it does is uses your phone camera to tell you what it is you're looking at. It shares data with iNaturalist too to kind of help update all those different things people are seeing in the wild. The other way to help is by planting native species in your garden or in your community. I'm going to flip to another handout to explain that. Here's that handout. I put this together for you guys based on this book right here, which was written by an Ohio author. And the whole book is about the species that are native to Ohio that help butterflies thrive and survive. Especially you guys who told me that you had gardens, you might want to check this handout out with your parent and see if you already have some of these in your garden or neighborhood, and if you want to consider adding more of them. Thanks. Bye.